What would you do if your own husband greeted you not with flowers after a trip, but with a lawyer? I thought I was proving my independence by telling him I'd go away and ignore him. Instead, when I came home, the first face I saw was a divorce attorney's. My name is Evadne Cole. I am 33 years old, and I swear I never thought a simple trip would end my marriage. I told my husband Tom that I was going away for a week with friends, that I needed space, and that I would ignore his calls because I wanted to focus on myself. He asked if I was serious, and I said it with a smile, like it was no big deal. I thought he would sulk, maybe complain, but still be there waiting when I came back. That was how it always worked. I would push boundaries, he would stay quiet, and eventually he would forgive me. But this time was different. When I returned home, dragging my suitcase through the door, there was no warm hug or familiar silence. Instead, a man in a suit was sitting at the table with a stack of papers in front of him. Tom stood beside him, calm and steady, and I felt the air leave my body. It was a divorce attorney. In that moment, I still told myself Tom was overreacting, that he was trying to scare me, that it was just drama. I thought I could talk my way out, explain that a little trip didn't mean anything, that he was twisting everything into betrayal. But the look on his face told me this time was not like the others. It all started in our kitchen one ordinary Thursday evening. Tom had just come home from work, tired as usual, still in his collared shirt with his sleeves rolled up. The kids were in the living room watching cartoons, their laughter drifting in, and I was scrolling on my phone, looking at vacation packages. I had been talking with my friends for weeks about needing a break, about taking a trip without husbands or children, just fun and freedom. When Tom asked what I was looking at, I told him plainly that I was booking flights. He asked where and with who, and I told him I was going with my girlfriends to the coast. He asked when, and I said next month. He frowned and said that was the same week Liam had his school play, and Sophie had her dentist appointment. I waved it off, saying he could handle those things just fine, that I deserved time away. He asked if I was really planning to leave him with all the responsibility while I ran off. I laughed and told him not to act like a victim, that men should be able to manage their own children. He said that wasn't the point, that this was about respect and communication. I shrugged and told him respect went both ways, and I needed space. I even told him I planned to ignore his calls during the trip because I didn't want to be bothered with his constant questions. He looked at me stunned, but I doubled down. I said it would be healthy for us, that he was too attached, that a week without me would make him appreciate me more. He went quiet, and I hated that silence because it felt like judgment. I filled it by saying he was lucky I wasn't doing anything worse, that plenty of women in my position would be out looking for excitement. He asked why I felt the need to phrase it that way. I told him he was twisting my words, that he always made me feel guilty for wanting more. In truth, I liked how the power shifted when I said things like that. He looked small when I accused him of insecurity. Later that night, I called my mother to tell her about the argument. She said Tom needed to grow up, that men always expected women to sacrifice everything, and I had every right to go on a trip. She told me not to back down. Her approval made me feel vindicated. But when I spoke with my brother Peter, the reaction was the opposite. He said I was being reckless, that Tom had always treated me with patience, and I was humiliating him. I snapped back, told Peter he had no idea what it was like to be stuck with a man who never changed, who never gave me the thrill I deserved. Peter told me one day I would regret pushing too far. I hung up on him. The next morning, I posted about the trip on social media. I wrote that I would be unreachable for a week, that I needed a break from responsibility, that I was going to live my best life. My friends commented with clapping emojis and wine glasses, cheering me on. I made sure Tom saw the post. When he got home that night, he only asked if I was sure this was what I wanted to do. I rolled my eyes and said I wasn't asking permission. He went silent again, and that silence made me more defensive. I told him if he couldn't handle me being gone for a week, maybe he didn't deserve me at all. He didn't argue. He simply nodded, turned away, and helped the kids with their homework. That irritated me even more than if he had shouted. I wanted a reaction, something dramatic so I could point and say he was the problem. Instead, he gave me nothing. I told myself he was sulking, that he would come around, but deep down I sensed something had shifted. The night before I booked the tickets, I sat in the living room with Cassie and Dana on video chat. They laughed when I told them Tom was upset, saying all men were clingy when their wives wanted space. They said I should ignore his complaints, that he would have to get used to the new me. Their voices were like fuel, and I pressed the button to confirm my flights. Afterward, Tom walked in and saw the confirmation email open on my laptop. He asked if I had really done it. I said yes with a smile, adding that I hoped he enjoyed babysitting for a week. He corrected me, saying they were his children too, not just mine to hand off. I told him he was being dramatic, that it was only a week, and that if he couldn't handle it, maybe he wasn't cut out for marriage. He went still, his jaw tightening, then turned away and said nothing. I pretended I had won. I didn't know then that his silence wasn't surrender. It was the first sign that he was already planning how to respond. The day of departure came faster than I expected. I packed my suitcase with summer dresses and swimsuits, humming as I folded each piece. Tom hovered in the doorway of the bedroom, watching quietly. He asked if I was really going through with it. I told him to stop asking the same question, that I had earned this trip, and I didn't need his permission. He asked who was watching Sophie and Liam while I was away. I said he was their father, so it was his responsibility. He said it wasn't about responsibility, it was about family. I waved him off and said family would still be there when I got back. He told me I was being selfish, and I told him selfish was just another word men used when women didn't sacrifice themselves. His face was unreadable, and it irritated me that he wouldn't fight. I wanted a reaction, a crack in his calm, but instead he just picked up my suitcase and carried it to the car. At the airport, I texted my mother that Tom had barely spoken to me on the way. She replied that he was sulking and I should enjoy myself. My brother Peter, on the other hand, sent me a long message telling me I was abandoning my children for a fling. I laughed and showed it to Cassie, who said he was just jealous he wasn't going on vacation. When the plane took off, I silenced my phone. I didn't want Tom interrupting my week of freedom. At the hotel, the atmosphere was electric. Cassie and Dana were already waiting with cocktails by the pool. We posed for photos, made jokes about mom life on pause, and uploaded everything to social media. I made sure to add captions about ignoring reality, about not checking in with anyone. Tom sent a message the second evening asking how the kids were doing with him. I saw it and put my phone face down. Later, I texted back that he was too needy, that he needed to grow up. He didn't reply, and that silence felt like a small victory. Damon arrived on the third day. He was part of our larger circle, a marketing guy with an easy smile, the type who always knew what to say. He joined us at the bar, and soon he was buying rounds for everyone. I sat close to him, laughed at his stories, and let him put his arm around my chair. Cassie snapped a photo of the group, and in it, Damon was leaning toward me while I tilted toward him. She posted it, tagging everyone, and I didn't think twice. That night, I noticed Tom had seen it. He didn't message me, but I imagined his face and told myself he deserved to feel uncomfortable. I said to myself that if he had been more fun, I wouldn't need these moments. On the fourth day, Damon and I walked along the beach with the others trailing behind. He joked about how lucky Tom was, and I replied that Tom didn't even appreciate what he had. Damon smirked and said then Tom was a fool. I told myself it was harmless talk, just words, just attention. But deep down, I knew I wanted Tom to see this, to realize I was desirable. I wanted him to hurt so he would fight for me. Instead, he stayed silent. My in-laws called me on the fifth day. Judith's voice was calm but cutting. She said she and Graham had been taking care of Sophie and Liam after school because Tom was working late. She asked why I hadn't called the children even once. I said I was giving them independence. She told me that was a lie, and that I should be ashamed. I ended the call quickly, telling myself she had always judged me. Carla, my mother, told me to ignore Judith and enjoy my time. She said in-laws never appreciated the sacrifices daughters made. I clung to those words because they kept me from feeling guilty. On the last night, Damon made a toast at dinner. He said life was too short to be tied down, that everyone deserved freedom. I raised my glass and said Tom would just have to deal with it. Cassie laughed, Dana clapped, and I felt like the star of the evening. I posted one more photo captioned "unreachable and unbothered." I thought it was clever. On the flight home, I finally turned my phone back on. Dozens of messages popped up. Tom had not written again, but Peter had, furious. He said Tom had been calm, looking after everything, while I was flaunting myself online. He said people were talking, that I had crossed a line. I deleted the message without answering. As I landed, I pictured Tom waiting at the airport, maybe upset but still mine. Instead, he wasn't there. When I got home, dragging my suitcase through the door, the kids were at my mother's house, and Tom was seated at the table with a man in a suit beside him. The man stood and handed me an envelope. I stared at the papers inside, the words blurring. Tom looked at me with calm eyes and said nothing. My week of ignoring him had ended with him speaking louder than ever without raising his voice. I told myself the papers were just a scare tactic, that Tom wouldn't actually go through with it. That evening, I stormed into the kitchen demanding an explanation. He was sitting at the table, calm as ever, sipping tea like nothing had happened. I asked if he really thought divorce was the answer. He said he was doing what was necessary to protect himself and the children. I snapped that he was trying to make me look like a bad mother. He replied that I had made those choices on my own. His words stung, so I laughed loudly and told him he was being dramatic. I said no judge would take him seriously just because I went on a vacation. He didn't argue. He simply slid a folder across the table. Inside were printed copies of my posts, photos of me with Damon, captions about being unreachable and unbothered. He had screenshots of messages where I told him I would ignore him, proof of the calls I refused, even a record of the days I never spoke to Sophie or Liam. I tried to brush it off, said social media was all for fun, that none of it was real. He asked if the kids thought it was fun when they asked why their mother hadn't called. I told him not to twist things, that the kids didn't even notice. He said calmly that they noticed everything. I grew angrier. I accused him of spying, of saving things just to use against me. He said he was simply documenting what already existed. I told him he was pathetic for keeping records like some detective. He said he was responsible for protecting the children and himself from further harm. His tone was so steady that it scared me. Later, I called my mother and cried that Tom was turning against me. She said he was bluffing, that men always threatened but never followed through. She told me to hold my head high, but when I called Peter, he was furious. He said Tom was right to do what he was doing. He said I had humiliated my husband, abandoned my children, and posted the evidence myself. He said I had no one to blame but me. I shouted back that he was betraying his own sister. He said I betrayed myself. His words made me slam down the phone, but they echoed in my mind. A few days later, I agreed to meet friends at a restaurant. I wanted to control the story, make them laugh, show them I was fine. I wore a new dress, smiled brightly, and told them Tom had overreacted because he was insecure. I said he was jealous that men like Damon paid attention to me. Some friends laughed politely, but others avoided eye contact. Cassie said Tom was boring anyway, that I deserved someone fun. Dana nodded, but I saw doubt in her face. Halfway through the meal, Tom walked past with Peter. He didn't stop at our table, didn't even glance my way. He just walked straight out the door with quiet dignity. I tried to turn it into a joke, said he was sulking again, but no one laughed. The silence was unbearable. That night at home, I confronted him again. I demanded to know why he had to involve lawyers instead of talking to me like adults. He said I had made a public show of disrespect, so now it was being handled publicly. I gasped and said he was trying to humiliate me. He shook his head and said I had already done that to myself. I told him I could fix everything if he just dropped the case. He replied that respect couldn't be repaired once destroyed. I accused him of being cold, of throwing away years together for pride. He said he wasn't throwing anything away. I had. His voice stayed calm, no shouting, no anger. That calm was worse than rage. It meant he was certain. I tried one last trick. I told him the children needed us together. He said the children needed stability, not chaos. I said he was exaggerating. He said the judge would decide. His certainty made my chest tighten. I went to bed alone, shaking with anger, but also fear. For the first time, I realized Tom wasn't bluffing. He was moving forward, and my laughter and dismissals were no longer enough to stop him. The weeks that followed felt like walking on thin ice, except I still convinced myself I had control. Tom moved around the house quietly, almost politely, but I could sense a wall between us. He tucked Sophie into bed, helped Liam with homework, and handled dinners without asking for my help. I told myself he was just trying to look good, that he wanted to play the hero while I looked careless. One evening, I tried to pull him into an argument. I said he was trying to turn the children against me. He replied calmly that the children could see everything on their own. That silence afterward was worse than any fight. I went to my mother's house for comfort. Carla told me I should stop worrying, that Tom was only acting out to scare me. She said men always caved when women stood firm. She told me I was strong and deserved freedom. Her words gave me false courage. I told her Tom would come crawling back once he realized how much he needed me. But Peter ruined that confidence later. He called me and said Tom had already spoken to lawyers, that he had documents, witnesses, and even teacher notes about the kids asking where I was. I told Peter he was lying to scare me. He said I was lying to myself. At family dinner the following Sunday, the split became obvious. Judith and Graham, my in-laws, greeted the kids warmly but barely looked at me. When I tried to make small talk, Judith asked if I had spoken to Sophie during my trip. I said yes, pretending, but Tom quietly corrected me. He said the children had asked for me every day, and I hadn't called once. The table fell silent. I laughed and said he was exaggerating. Graham said the truth didn't need exaggeration. My cheeks burned and I tried to laugh it off, but the weight in the room was unbearable. After dinner, I accused Tom of humiliating me in front of his parents. He replied that I had humiliated myself. I told him he was acting superior, like a saint. He said he was simply telling the truth. That night, he packed another small bag. I demanded to know where he was going. He said he was meeting with his lawyer again. I shouted that he was tearing the family apart, that he would regret it, but he walked out the door without raising his voice. I went to Cassie and Dana the next day. I told them Tom was obsessed with making me look bad. Cassie said he was being controlling, that no one could really divorce over a vacation. Dana stayed quiet, then finally said Tom had always been decent, and maybe I had pushed him too far. I snapped at her, told her she didn't understand, but her hesitation planted doubt. That evening, Tom returned, carrying folders and his laptop. He spread papers on the table, making neat piles. I asked what they were. He said they were financial records. I told him he was paranoid, acting like I was the enemy. He said calmly that he was simply protecting himself and the children. I mocked him, saying he was pathetic for hiding behind lawyers. He didn't respond. He just continued writing notes, highlighting sections. Watching him work so methodically unnerved me. He wasn't angry, he wasn't broken, he was preparing. I tried to throw one last barb. I said men like him never found happiness after divorce, that he would end up alone. He looked at me with steady eyes and said, being alone was better than living without respect. Then he returned to his papers, leaving me standing in the kitchen with nothing to say. I called my mother again, desperate for reassurance. She repeated her usual line, that Tom would never go through with it, but her voice didn't sound as confident as before. I hung up, pacing the living room, realizing my mother's words felt hollow. Later that night, as I walked past the table, I saw Tom had written dates in bold letters, court appointments lined up. For the first time, the reality struck me. His silence wasn't sulking, it was finality. He was moving ahead, and I was running out of ways to spin the story in my favor. The final blow landed on an ordinary morning at work. I was greeting people at the front desk when a man in a suit approached and asked for me by name. I smiled politely, thinking he was a client, but instead he handed me a large envelope and said I had been served. My co-workers looked on, curious, while my face burned hot. I tried to laugh it off, saying it was probably a mix-up, but my hand shook as I opened the papers. Inside were divorce filings, with Tom's name across the top. Attached were pages of evidence, screenshots of my posts, photos of me with Damon, records of the messages I ignored, even statements from his parents about covering for me with the children. Each page was neat, organized, undeniable. I shoved the envelope into my bag and rushed to the break room, telling anyone who asked that it was nothing serious. But my chest was pounding. That evening I confronted Tom the moment I walked through the door. I demanded to know why he was humiliating me in public like that. He said calmly that I had already humiliated myself, and he was only protecting what mattered. I said he was making me look bad instead of fixing our marriage. He answered that the marriage was already broken, that respect could not be patched back together. His voice was steady, his eyes clear, and that terrified me more than if he had shouted. I tried to twist it again. I told him he was selfish, that he was abandoning the children by filing for divorce. He said he was doing the opposite, that he was securing stability for them. He showed me more documents, custody plans, financial protections, notes from teachers. I snapped that he was turning everyone against me. He said the evidence spoke for itself. I ran to my mother again, crying that Tom was trying to ruin me. She said it was a bluff, that no judge would care about some photos and captions. She told me to wait it out, but Peter called me that night with a different tone. He said Tom had done everything by the book, no shouting, no mistakes, only careful preparation. He said Tom had been more patient with me than anyone else would have, and now he was simply reclaiming his dignity. I screamed at Peter for siding with him, but he told me I had no one else to blame. His words lingered long after I hung up. Cassie offered to help at first, saying she would back me up if asked. But when she realized Tom had actual evidence, her tone shifted. She said she didn't want to get dragged into court. Dana avoided my calls altogether. Even my mother sounded weaker when I demanded reassurance. She told me to stay calm, but I could hear doubt in her voice. Everywhere I turned, walls were closing in. At home, Tom remained polite but distant. He cooked for the kids, helped them with bedtime, and kept conversation short. He spoke to me only about practical matters, never emotions. I told myself he was playing a role, that once the shock passed, he would soften, but his calmness was unshakable. One night, I begged him to stop, told him it was only a vacation, only jokes online. He said he had no interest in jokes anymore. He repeated that respect was not something to laugh about. I accused him of being cold, of letting pride destroy us. He replied that I had destroyed us with my choices, and he was simply writing the ending. I shouted that he would regret it. He answered that regret already lived in the house, but it wasn't his. His certainty left me breathless. Days later, another envelope arrived, this time with the official schedule for hearings. Tom handed it to me himself. No anger, no triumph, just formality. He said I should be on time. I clutched the paper, shaking, realizing there was no way out. He had documented everything, built his case patiently, and now the process was in motion. My laughter, my excuses, my gaslighting, they had all lost power. Tom had chosen silence and law, and it was louder than anything I could say. The courthouse was nothing like I imagined. I thought it would feel chaotic, filled with noise and arguments, but instead it was quiet, sterile, and suffocating. Tom walked ahead of me in his dark suit, shoulders straight, expression calm. He didn't look at me once, and that unsettled me more than any glare would have. I tried to walk in with the same confidence, head high, but inside my chest was pounding. People glanced at us as we entered the room. and I imagined they all knew the story, that I was the wife who flaunted freedom, that he was the husband who had finally had enough. The clerk called our names, and we sat across from each other at the long table. Tom had his lawyer beside him, a woman with sharp eyes and a stack of neatly bound documents. I had no one. I had told myself I didn't need an attorney, that I could talk my way out the same way I always had with Tom. I had convinced myself he still loved me enough to hesitate when it came to final decisions. But looking at him across that table, I realized he wasn't hesitating at all. The judge entered, and the proceedings began. Tom's lawyer spoke first, laying out the timeline with calm precision. She described the trip, the messages I ignored, the public posts where I mocked my husband, the photos with Damon, and the weeks of neglect toward the children. Each statement was backed by documents, screenshots, and even witness notes. She handed exhibits to the judge like she was stacking bricks into a wall. Every piece of paper was something I had thought was harmless, funny, or private, now transformed into evidence. When it was my turn to speak, I tried to laugh it off. I told the judge it was just a vacation, just jokes on social media, that Tom had always been too serious. My voice echoed strangely in the room, too loud, too defensive. The judge didn't smile. Tom's lawyer asked if I had proof to dispute any of the documents. I said the posts were taken out of context. She asked if I had still posted them myself. I admitted yes. She asked if I had called my children during the trip. I said no, but insisted it was only a week. She asked if I had told Tom I would ignore him. I admitted I had. With every answer, I felt the ground shifting beneath me. I tried to turn it back on Tom. I said he was trying to paint me as unfit, when really he was just cold and controlling. I said he had always been too rigid, that he couldn't handle a woman with independence. The judge asked calmly if independence meant neglect. I had no reply. I turned to Tom, hoping he would look at me, show some flicker of softness, but his eyes stayed steady. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't gloating. He was simply done. My mother sat behind me in the gallery. She had promised to come for support, but when the lawyer showed the posts, I could feel her shrinking in her seat. She didn't whisper encouragement like she usually did. She just stayed silent. Peter sat on the other side of the room near Tom's parents. He didn't look at me either. He only nodded once in Tom's direction, like he was proud of him. That small gesture cut deeper than the papers. When the judge reviewed the evidence aloud, every sentence felt like a nail being hammered in. She spoke of disregard, of public disrespect, of neglectful choices. She said Tom had demonstrated consistent responsibility and calm, while I had shown patterns of mockery and abandonment. The words blurred in my ears, but I caught the conclusion clearly. The court would approve Tom's request to dissolve the marriage, secure financial protections, and grant him primary custody of the children with structured visitation for me. My mouth went dry. I wanted to argue, to scream that it wasn't fair, but the judge had already moved to the paperwork. Tom signed first, hand steady, expression neutral. When the papers slid to me, my hand shook so badly I smudged the ink. I whispered that we didn't have to end it this way, that we could still work things out. Tom finally looked at me then, and his eyes were tired, not angry. He said quietly that respect, once broken, couldn't be rebuilt. Then he stood, shook his lawyer's hand, and walked out. The sound of his footsteps faded before I could think of another word. I sat frozen, staring at the empty chair he had left behind. Around me, the court moved on to other cases, voices rising and falling, like nothing significant had happened. But for me, the world had just collapsed. When I left the courtroom, my mother followed a few steps behind. She touched my arm weakly, said something about being strong, but her words had no weight. She didn't fight for me. She didn't argue with the outcome. She just looked pale and tired. Peter avoided me completely. He walked out with Tom and the in-laws, his posture firm, as if he had chosen his side without hesitation. Outside, the air felt heavy, almost unreal. Tom stood with his lawyer, reviewing papers one last time. His parents stood beside him, calm and supportive. Sophie and Liam weren't there, but I imagined their faces, and for the first time I realized they would grow up with the memory of a father who never raised his voice but still won. I wanted to call out, to say something sharp or clever, but nothing came. My throat was dry, my mind blank. Tom didn't even glance my way as they left together. It was as though I was already erased from their lives. I stood on the courthouse steps, clutching my empty bag, the papers inside rustling. Passers-by moved around me, barely noticing. I thought about Cassie and Dana, how they had once laughed and cheered me on. Now they had gone quiet, avoiding my calls. Even my mother, standing beside me, couldn't find words strong enough to defend me. Everything I had used to shield myself, excuses, jokes, denial, had crumbled under the weight of Tom's calm preparation. He had chosen the law, not rage, and that was what cut the deepest. He hadn't fought me with shouts. He had beaten me with silence and paperwork, and as the courthouse doors shut behind him, I finally understood what I had lost. Not just a husband, not just a marriage, but the last thread of dignity I thought I still controlled. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.